The pre-flight checklist crinkled between Captain Alexis Viper, Reeves's gloved fingers as she methodically worked through each item, her voice steady and professional over the radio. To the ground crew bustling around Thunderbolt Air Base in the pre-dawn darkness, she was just another pilot preparing for what they assumed was a routine training mission. They had no idea that in less than 6 hours, this woman, who many still whispered didn't belong in a cockpit, would single-handedly prevent the massacre of an entire Marine battalion trapped behind enemy lines. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning air at Thunderbolt carried the familiar scent of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid, mixed with the crisp saltiness that drifted in from the Pacific Ocean, just beyond the base's eastern perimeter. Captain Reeves had been breathing that same air for 18 months now, ever since her controversial assignment to the 127th. Fighter Squadron had sparked heated debates in Pentagon briefing rooms and military forums across the country. The assignment, that many had called a political stunt and dangerous social experimentation. Alexis adjusted her helmet and ran through the F-35 Lightning II's complex systems with the practiced efficiency of someone who had memorized every switch, every gauge, every possible malfunction scenario. Her movements were precise, economical, betraying none of the internal fire that had been burning since the day her flight instructor at the Naval Academy had pulled her aside and suggested she might be better suited for transport aircraft or logistics support. The irony wasn't lost on her that the very aircraft she now commanded, the most advanced fighter jet in the world, had been designed with input from dozens of female engineers and technicians. Yet when it came to actually flying these technological marvels in combat, the old guard still clung to outdated beliefs about women's capabilities in high-stress, life-or-death situations. Around her, the morning shift was beginning to stir. Master Sergeant Rodriguez emerged from the maintenance hangar, coffee in hand, nodding respectfully as he always did. Unlike many of the base personnel, Rodriguez had never treated her differently because of her gender. He'd served with female mechanics, intelligence officers, and support staff who had proven themselves time and again in Iraq and Afghanistan. But even Rodriguez sometimes caught himself holding his breath during her more aggressive training maneuvers. An unconscious reaction born from decades of military culture that associated high-risk combat flying with masculine traits. "Morning, Captain," Rodriguez called out, his breath visible in the cool morning air. "Birds ready for you. All systems green, fuel topped off. Weather's looking clear for the next 4 hours, though there's a front moving in from the west around noon." Alexis nodded, appreciating Rodriguez's straightforward professionalism. "Thank you, Sergeant. Any word from maintenance on that minor hydraulic pressure fluctuation I reported yesterday?" "All checked out, ma'am. Turned out to be a faulty sensor reading. We replaced the unit and ran full diagnostics twice. She's flying better than ever." As Rodriguez walked away, Alexis caught a glimpse of 2 younger airmen watching her from across the flight line. Their body language spoke volumes, arms crossed, heads tilted in skeptical conversation. She'd overheard similar conversations countless times over the past year and a half. Comments about whether women had the killer instinct necessary for air-to-air combat. Debates about reaction times, G-force tolerance, and split-second decision-making under pressure. What these critics didn't know, what nobody at Thunderbolt Air Base knew, was that Captain Alexis Reeves had already proven herself in ways that would have shocked them. During her supposedly routine training flights, she had been secretly participating in classified simulation exercises that tested the limits of human performance in aerial combat. Her scores consistently ranked in the top 3% of all pilots who had ever taken these assessments, regardless of gender. More importantly, hidden in her service record under layers of classification were commendations from special operations missions that had never made it into official reports. reconnaissance flights over hostile territory that had provided critical intelligence, close air support missions during training exercises that were actually real-world operations disguised for political reasons, emergency medical evacuations from locations that didn't officially exist on any military maps. But today's mission was supposed to be different. Today was genuinely scheduled as a routine training flight weapons systems checks, formation flying with 2 other F-35s, and air-to-ground targeting practice at the Sandpiper Range, 60 miles south of the base. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison had briefed it as a standard proficiency evaluation, the kind of exercise that every pilot in the squadron completed quarterly to maintain their combat readiness certification. Alexis climbed into her aircraft's cockpit. The familiar embrace of the ejection seat and the soft glow of the heads-up display welcoming her like an old friend. She had logged over 400 hours in F-35s during the past 2 years, more than many pilots accumulated in 4 years of service. Every hour had been scrutinized, evaluated, and criticized more intensely than her male counterparts experienced. Every landing had to be perfect. Every weapons system check had to be flawless. Every radio communication had to be crisp and professional. The double standard was exhausting, but it had also made her a better pilot than she might have been otherwise. When you know that every mistake will be magnified and used as evidence against your entire gender's capability, you learn to make very few mistakes. As she began the engine startup sequence, Alexis allowed herself a moment to think about her father, Colonel James Reeves, who had flown F-16s during the Gulf War. He had been one of her biggest supporters, but even he had expressed private concerns about the physical and psychological demands of modern aerial combat. "It's not about being tough," he had told her during one of their last conversations before she shipped out to Thunderbolt. "It's about being able to kill another human being from 30,000 feet and then come home and sleep at night." Her father didn't know that she had already faced that test and passed it. The radio crackled to life as tower control began coordinating the morning's flight operations. 3 F-35s would launch in formation, conduct their training exercise, and return by noon, a routine so familiar that most of the base personnel wouldn't even bother watching the takeoff. None of them suspected that before this routine training mission was over, Captain Alexis Viper Reeves would be engaging in the kind of air-to-ground combat that would make military historians rewrite the textbooks on close air support operations. That her split-second decisions would mean the difference between life and death for 300 Marines pinned down in a hellscape that wasn't supposed to exist on any official mission reports. Most importantly, none of them knew that by sunset, the woman they had dismissed as a diversity hire would have single-handedly proven that the future of aerial combat belonged not to those who fit traditional stereotypes, but to those who combine technical excellence with the kind of courage that transcends gender entirely. But that revelation was still hours away. For now, Captain Reeves was just another pilot running through her pre-flight checks, invisible in plain sight, preparing for what everyone assumed would be just another ordinary day in an extraordinary machine. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As Captain Alexis Reeves completed her engine startup sequence, the familiar whine of the F-35's Pratt & Whitney turbofan filled the cockpit with its reassuring power. But there was something different about the way she handled the control's subtle movements that spoke of experience far beyond what her official flight logs indicated. Her fingers danced across the multifunction displays with an almost unconscious precision, accessing system menus and configuration settings that most pilots had to think carefully about. The tower's voice crackled through her headset. "Viper 1, you're cleared for taxi to runway 07. Wind is light and variable, visibility unlimited. Have a good training flight out there. Tower, Viper 1 copies. Taxi to 07. Alexis responded, her voice carrying the calm professionalism that had become her trademark. But as she began rolling toward the runway, she made a subtle adjustment to her radio encryption settings, a modification that wasn't part of any standard training protocol. The change was so quick and practiced that even if someone had been watching her cockpit displays, they would have dismissed it as routine frequency management. In reality, she had just activated a secure communication channel that connected her to networks far beyond Thunderbolt Air Base's Standard Operations Center. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Vance, her assigned wingman for today's mission, pulled her F-35 alongside Alexis's aircraft as they taxied. Through the canopy, Vance offered a thumbs-up gesture and a smile that seemed genuine enough, but Alexis had learned to read the subtle body language that revealed people's true feelings. Vance's smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and her posture suggested the kind of hyper-alertness that came from flying with someone you weren't entirely confident about. It wasn't personal animosity. Vance was actually one of the more supportive pilots in the squadron, but she had been assigned as Alexis's wingman for what everyone understood to be evaluative purposes. If something went wrong during today's training exercise, Vance would be expected to provide detailed observations about Alexis's performance, decision-making, and adherence to protocols. What Vance didn't know was that Alexis had already flown wing position for her during a classified mission 8 months earlier, a mission where they had provided close air support for a special operations team extracting high-value intelligence assets from a location that officially didn't exist. Vance had been told it was an enhanced simulation exercise and had never learned the truth about that night's activities. The third pilot in their formation, Major Thompson, was less subtle about his skepticism. His F-35 maintained precise formation distance, but his radio transmissions carried the clipped, overly formal tone of someone who was following regulations rather than building team cohesion. Thompson had been vocal in squadron meetings about his concerns regarding political correctness affecting combat readiness, though he was careful to frame his objections in terms of unit cohesion and proven experience levels. As the 3 aircraft approached the runway threshold, Alexis noticed something that made her pause. Ground control was directing them to hold short, citing unexpected priority traffic that needed to land immediately. But the sky was clear, and no other aircraft were visible on approach. More interesting was the fact that 2 unmarked SUVs had appeared near the base operations building, their occupants remaining inside with engines running. "All aircraft hold short of runway 07, ground control announced. Priority inbound traffic estimated 2 minutes out." Alexis adjusted her mirrors and caught sight of what was approaching from the north, a single aircraft flying unusually low and fast. Her trained eye immediately identified it as a modified C-130, but the flight profile was all wrong for a normal transport mission. The aircraft was descending rapidly and approaching the base from an angle that suggested it had deviated from standard civilian air traffic routes. More telling was the fact that Alexis recognized the aircraft's tail markings. They were subtle variations of standard Air Force identifiers that would look legitimate to casual observers, but actually indicated something far more significant to those who knew what to look for. This was a Special Operations Command asset, and its unscheduled arrival at Thunderbolt meant that something had gone wrong somewhere in the world. "Viper 1, did you copy that hold instruction?" Major Thompson's voice carried a hint of impatience. He was scheduled for a golf game that afternoon and wanted to complete the training mission efficiently. "Affirmative, Viper 3, holding short," Alexis replied, but her attention was focused on the encrypted communication device built into her flight suit survival vest. A device that officially didn't exist and that she wore on every training flight, just in case. The device was vibrating in a specific pattern that she had memorized during classified briefings. 3 short pulses, followed by a pause, then 2 long pulses. The code meant "stand by for possible mission tasking" and indicated that somewhere in the global special operations community, a situation was developing that might require immediate air support from assets that could respond within hours rather than days. As the C-130 touched down and immediately began taxiing toward a restricted area of the base that most pilots never accessed, Alexis made a decision that would have surprised everyone who thought they knew her capabilities. She began mentally reviewing contingency plans for converting a training mission into a real-world operation plans that she had memorized but hoped never to use. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same military establishment that questioned whether women could handle the stress of combat was about to discover just how wrong their assumptions had been. But that revelation was still hours away, hidden behind the facade of routine training exercises and the comfortable certainty that today would be just another ordinary day in the life of Thunderbolt Air Base. The priority aircraft had landed and was already disappearing behind classified hangars when ground control finally cleared them for takeoff. As Alexis advanced her throttles and felt the F-35's incredible power pressing her back into her seat, she allowed herself a small smile. Whatever was developing in that restricted hangar, she was exactly where she needed to be, airborne, armed, and ready for whatever the world might throw at her in the next few hours. The 3 F-35s lifted off into the clear morning sky, their official mission unchanged, but their actual destiny about to be rewritten by events that none of them could yet imagine. At 22,000 feet above the Pacific, the 3 F-35s settled into their assigned training formation, the morning sun casting long shadows across the ocean's surface below. The flight to Sandpiper Range would take another 15 minutes, giving the pilots time to run through their communication checks and weapons system diagnostics. For Captain Alexis Reeves, it also provided an unwelcome opportunity to experience the subtle but persistent dynamics that had defined her military aviation career. "Viper Flight, this is range control," came the voice of Master Sergeant Patricia Quinn, the range safety officer who coordinated all training activities at Sandpiper. "We've got your flight plan logged for air-to-ground ordnance delivery starting at 0900 hours. Weather is clear, no conflicting traffic. You're cleared to proceed to holding Area Alpha and await further instructions." "Range control, Viper 1 copies," Alexis responded professionally. But even in that brief radio exchange, she could sense the difference in how Quinn addressed her versus her male counterparts. The range safety officer's tone was slightly more formal, more carefully articulated, as if Quinn felt the need to be extra clear when communicating with a female pilot. It was a small thing, perhaps unconscious, but after 18 months of similar interactions, Alexis had become acutely aware of these micro-adjustments in how people communicated with her. Major Thompson's voice cut through the radio frequency with the kind of casual authority that he seemed to reserve for moments when he wanted to assert squadron hierarchy. "Viper 1, what's your fuel state? I want to make sure we're not cutting things close today. Some of us have commitments this afternoon that can't be rescheduled." The question itself was reasonable. Fuel management was a critical part of any training mission. But Thompson's phrasing carried an implicit suggestion that Alexis might not be managing her fuel consumption properly, and his reference to commitments was a none too subtle reminder that he considered this training exercise an inconvenience rather than a legitimate military operation. "Viper 3, fuel state is 7,000 pounds. Well within parameters for planned mission duration," Alexis replied, keeping her voice neutral despite the irritation building in her chest. She had calculated their fuel consumption 3 different ways during the pre-flight briefing and had built-in safety margins that Thompson apparently hadn't bothered to review. Lieutenant Commander Vance keyed her radio with what sounded like an attempt to diffuse the tension. "Viper 2 shows 6,800 pounds. Looking good for the full training scenario." Her voice carried a diplomatic tone that suggested she was trying to Maintain professionalism while navigating the undercurrents of squadron politics. But Vance's attempt at peacekeeping inadvertently highlighted another aspect of Alexis's daily reality. Even the supportive members of her squadron felt compelled to act as mediators, as if her presence inherently created conflict that needed to be managed. The assumption seemed to be that any tension in the unit must somehow relate to the female pilot issue rather than normal military friction between personalities and leadership styles. The truth was more complex and more frustrating. Alexis had encountered 3 distinct types of treatment from her fellow aviators during her time at Thunderbolt. The first group, like Thompson, were openly skeptical and seemed to view her presence as a political statement rather than a military assignment. They questioned her decisions more frequently, scrutinized her performance more closely, and attributed any mistakes to gender-related deficiencies rather than normal learning experiences that every pilot went through. The second group, including Vance, were professionally supportive, but maintained a careful distance that felt almost protective. They seemed to believe that women could be competent pilots, but required different handling, gentler criticism, and more encouragement. While well-intentioned, this approach was equally frustrating because it still treated her as fundamentally different rather than simply another aviator with individual strengths and weaknesses. The third group, unfortunately the smallest, treated her exactly as they would any other pilot. Master Sergeant Rodriguez fell into this category, as did a handful of younger officers who had grown up with female classmates in military academies and were genuinely comfortable with gender integration in combat roles. But even these individuals sometimes caught themselves making assumptions or adjustments based on unconscious biases that had been shaped by decades of military culture. Viper flight, the advised, were showing some unusual electromagnetic interference on our tracking systems, range control announced, interrupting Alexis's thoughts. Nothing that should affect your mission, but we may have some intermittent communication issues. Standard backup procedures are in effect. Alexis felt a familiar tingle of alertness. Electromagnetic interference at a military training range was unusual enough to warrant attention, especially when combined with the morning's unexpected arrival of the Special Operations aircraft. Her classified communication device had been silent since takeoff, but she made a mental note to monitor the frequency more closely. Range control, Viper 1. Can you characterize the interference? Is it localized or affecting a broader area? She asked, her question reflecting the kind of detailed technical interest that had earned her respect among the base's electronics warfare specialists. Thompson's voice immediately cut in before range control could respond. Viper 1, let's stay focused on our assigned training objectives. Range control has their procedures for handling technical issues. The rebuke was polite but pointed, suggesting that Alexis was overstepping her role by asking follow-up questions about operational conditions. The interaction perfectly encapsulated the impossible balance Alexis had to maintain. If she asked detailed questions or showed technical expertise beyond basic pilot skills, she was accused of overcomplicating simple situations or trying too hard to prove herself. If she remained silent and followed orders without question, she was criticized for lack of initiative or situational awareness. There seemed to be no middle ground where she could simply be a competent pilot doing her job. What made the situation even more complex was that Alexis actually did know more about electromagnetic warfare than most pilots in the squadron. Her classified background included extensive training in electronic countermeasures, signal intelligence, and the kind of technical warfare that was becoming increasingly important in modern military operations. But revealing that knowledge would raise questions about her training history that she wasn't authorized to answer. Viper 3, copy your guidance, she replied to Thompson, maintaining the diplomatic tone that had become second nature. Viper 1 is standing by for range instructions. As the 3 aircraft approached Sandpiper Range, Alexis could see the familiar, pattern of targets and observation towers that had hosted thousands of training sorties over the years. The range had been designed to simulate various combat scenarios, from close air support for ground troops to precision strikes against high-value targets. Today's exercise would test their ability to deliver ordnance accurately while coordinating with simulated friendly forces on the ground. But something felt different about this morning's setup. There were more vehicles around the range control building than usual, and Alexis could see what appeared to be additional communication equipment that hadn't been there during previous training flights. More significantly, her enhanced situational awareness, honed by months of classified operations, was picking up subtle indicators that today's routine training might be more complex than advertised. The encrypted communication device in her survival vest vibrated once, a brief pulse that could have been a routine system check or could have been something more significant. Alexis resisted the urge to check the device, knowing that any unusual movement in the cockpit would be visible to her wingman and might raise questions she couldn't answer. Instead, she focused on the immediate task ahead, running through weapons system checks and target acquisition procedures with the mechanical precision that had become her trademark. Whatever was developing around them, she would be ready to respond with the kind of professional competence that transcended the gender debates that had defined her career. The irony wasn't lost on her that in a few hours, the same people who questioned her emotional stability under pressure would witness her making life and death decisions with a clarity and courage that would redefine their understanding of what it meant to be a warrior in the modern military. First indication that something had gone catastrophically wrong came not through official channels, but through the sudden activation of Alexis's classified communication device. The vibration pattern was urgent and unmistakable. 5 rapid pulses followed by a sustained buzz that meant immediate operational priority. All assets respond. She was in the middle of lining up her first practice bombing run when the device activated, the sensation barely perceptible through her flight suit, but as attention-grabbing as a fire alarm to someone trained to recognize it. Alexis maintained her approach to the target, outwardly calm and focused, while her mind raced through the implications of receiving an emergency tasking during what was supposed to be a routine training exercise. Viper 1, you're looking good. On approach, range control announced. Cleared hot for simulated ordnance delivery on target complex Alpha. Wind is calm, visibility unlimited. But even as Master Sergeant Quinn delivered the standard range clearance, Alexis could hear something different in her voice, a slight tension that suggested the range safety officer was monitoring more than just their training exercise. Professional. Military communicators were trained to maintain consistent vocal patterns regardless of external stress, but Quinn's words carried this subtle strain of someone managing multiple high-priority situations simultaneously. Alexis completed her simulated bombing run with mechanical precision, releasing imaginary ordnance on target and executing a textbook recovery maneuver. But her attention was divided between the training exercise and the growing certainty that something significant was developing beyond the boundaries of Sandpiper Range. "Nice run, Viper 1, Lieutenant Commander Vance transmitted. Right on. Target, Viper 2 is rolling in hot." As Vance began her approach, Alexis used the momentary lull to discreetly check her encrypted communication device. The small screen displayed a message that made her blood run cold. Marine Recon Team Bravo under attack. Grid 347,298. Immediate CAS required. 300. Personnel pinned down. Nitrogen monoxide. Other assets available. The coordinates placed the emergency approximately 180 nautical miles southeast of their current position, in a region that was officially designated as international waters, but which Alexis knew from classified briefings, contained several strategically important islands that served as forward observation posts for special operations forces. More concerning was the phrase, "no other assets available." In military terminology, that meant every other aircraft, ship, and ground unit in the region was either too far away, already committed to other missions, or unable to respond due to operational constraints. It suggested a crisis that had developed faster than the normal chain of command could handle. Viper flight, range control. We're showing some unusual activity on our long-range sensors. Maintain current training profile, but be advised we may need to alter your mission parameters on short notice. The carefully worded announcement confirmed Alexis's suspicions. Range control was monitoring the same emergency situation that had triggered her classified communication device, but they couldn't openly discuss classified operations over standard radio frequencies. The reference to unusual activity was military speak for something bad is happening that we can't talk about openly. Major Thompson completed his bombing run with his usual efficiency, but his radio transmission afterward carried a note of irritation. Range control, Viper 3. What kind of unusual activity are we talking about? I've got a schedule to maintain here. The question put range control in an impossible position. They couldn't provide specific details about classified operations over unsecured radio channels, but they also couldn't ignore a developing crisis that might require immediate response from available military assets. Viper 3, continue with planned training sequence. We'll provide additional information as it becomes available through appropriate channels. Alexis understood the subtext immediately. Range control was stalling for time while higher-level commanders decided whether to officially activate the F-35 squadron for emergency response. The decision would involve multiple layers of authorization, risk assessment, and political considerations that could take precious minutes to resolve. But the Marines, pinned down 180 miles away, didn't have minutes to spare. According to her classified intelligence briefing, Marine Recon Team Bravo was a 12-man unit conducting surveillance operations in disputed territorial waters. If they were under attack and requesting immediate close air support, it meant they were facing overwhelming enemy forces and were in imminent danger of being overrun. The encrypted device vibrated again with an updated message. Enemy forces. Estimated battalion strength. Team Bravo has civilians. Repeat. Civilians on site. Extraction impossible without air support. The mention of civilians changed everything. What had started as a military crisis was now a humanitarian emergency that transcended normal operational protocols. Somewhere in those disputed waters, Marine reconnaissance specialists were trying to protect non-combatants while being attacked by superior enemy forces. Alexis felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with real-world crisis response, but she forced herself to maintain the appearance of routine training operations. Her wingman had no knowledge of the developing emergency, and revealing classified information over unsecured radio channels would compromise operational security, while potentially putting other missions at risk. Viper flight, this is range control. We're receiving instructions to modify today's training exercise. Stand by for updated mission parameters. The announcement was carefully neutral, but Alexis recognized it as the first step in transitioning from training operations to real-world emergency response. Somewhere in the chain of command, senior officers were making the difficult decision to deploy training aircraft for actual combat operations, but the authorization process would take time that the Marines didn't have. According to standard military procedures, converting a training flight to an active combat mission required approval from multiple command levels, coordination with international authorities, and detailed mission planning that could take an hour or more to complete. Range control Viper 1. What's our fuel state requirement for the modified exercise? Alexis asked, her question containing multiple layers of meaning that only she and range control would understand. She was really asking whether they had enough fuel to reach the crisis location and conduct combat operations. Viper 1, estimate mission duration at 3 to 4 hours maximum. Current fuel states should be sufficient for all planned activities. The response confirmed that range control was already calculating flight times and fuel consumption for a rescue mission. They were preparing to officially task the F-35 squadron with emergency response, but the final authorization hadn't come. Through yet. Major Thompson's voice carried growing impatience. Range control, I need specifics here. What exactly are we being tasked to do? Some of us have important commitments that can't be postponed indefinitely. His complaint would have been laughable under normal circumstances, complaining about schedule conflicts during a potential combat emergency. But it also highlighted the fundamental difference between pilots who viewed military service as a job and those who understood it as a calling to protect others regardless of personal convenience. Alexis checked her fuel gauges, weapon system, status, and navigation displays while maintaining formation with her wingmen. If they received official authorization for emergency response, she would be ready to transition immediately from training operations to life-or-death combat. But if authorization was delayed or denied, she would face an impossible choice between following orders and saving lives. The encrypted communication device displayed a final message that crystallized the moral dimensions of the crisis. Time. Critical. Enemy advancing on civilian positions. Estimated 30 minutes before overrun. 30 minutes. Enough time to reach the crisis location if they departed immediately, but not enough time to wait for the normal authorization process to work its way through multiple command levels. As Alexis processed this information, she realized that her moment of truth was approaching faster than anyone had anticipated. In the next few minutes, she would discover whether 18 months of gender-based skepticism had been justified, or whether the critics who questioned women's ability to make life-and-death decisions under extreme pressure were about to learn just how wrong they had been. The magnitude of what was unfolding became crystal clear when Alexis cross-referenced the emergency coordinates with her classified navigation database. Grid 347,298 wasn't just any location in international waters. It was the site of Forward Operating Base Reef, a supposedly non-existent outpost that served as a critical intelligence gathering station for monitoring naval activities in one of the world's most strategically important shipping lanes. The base wasn't supposed to exist on any official maps, which meant that the Marines under attack weren't just conducting routine reconnaissance. They were protecting intelligence assets that could compromise American national security if they fell into enemy hands. More critically, the mention of civilians suggested that the base was also serving as a temporary refuge for rescued personnel, possibly journalists, aid workers, or foreign nationals who had been evacuated from other crisis zones in the region. As Alexis processed this information, her training in strategic intelligence allowed her to understand the broader implications of the crisis. If enemy forces overran Forward Operating Base Reef, they would gain access to sophisticated surveillance equipment, classified communication systems, and intelligence databases that could reveal American military capabilities and operations throughout the Pacific Theater. But the human cost was even more devastating to contemplate. 300 people, Marines, intelligence specialists, and innocent civilians were trapped in a fortified position that was designed for covert observation, not sustained combat against overwhelming enemy forces. The base's defensive capabilities were minimal because it had been built under the assumption that its location would remain secret and that any threat could be handled by rapid response from carrier-based aircraft. Viper flight, range control. We're receiving updated mission parameters from higher headquarters. Prepare for immediate tasking modification. Master Sergeant. Quinn's voice carried a new urgency that confirmed the transition from training exercise to real-world emergency response. But Alexis could also hear the strain of someone dealing with information that exceeded normal range control responsibilities. Quinn was probably receiving fragmentary updates about the crisis, While trying to maintain operational security over unsecured radio channels, Lieutenant Commander Vance keyed her radio with obvious confusion. "Range control, can you provide specifics?" "About the mission modification?" "We're currently configured for air-to-ground training with simulated ordnance. If you need us for a different type of mission, we'll need time to reconfigure systems." The question highlighted a critical problem that Alexis had already identified. Their F-35s were loaded with training equipment rather than live weapons, and converting to combat-ready status would normally require returning to base, reconfiguring aircraft systems, and loading actual ordnance, a process that could take 2 hours or more. But Alexis knew something her wingmen didn't. During her classified briefings, she had learned that the F-35s assigned to Thunderbolt Air Base carried dual-purpose training systems that could be rapidly converted to live weapons delivery in emergency situations. The conversion process was classified because it involved activating hidden capabilities that the military preferred to keep secret from potential adversaries. Viper flight. Be advised that mission modification will involve emergency configuration protocols. Detailed instructions will be provided via secure channels as they become available. Range Control's carefully worded response confirmed that they were preparing to activate the F-35's classified emergency capabilities. But the authorization to reveal and use those capabilities would have to come from the highest levels of military command, a process that could take precious minutes while Marines died waiting for air support. Major Thompson's frustration was becoming increasingly obvious in his radio transmissions. "Range Control, I need to understand what we're being asked to do here. If this involves actual combat operations, there are regulatory requirements that have to be met. We can't just convert a training flight into a real mission without proper authorization and mission planning." His objection was technically correct, but revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of how emergency response operations worked. In crisis situations, military commanders were authorized to deploy available assets immediately while working through regulatory requirements in parallel. The alternative, waiting for perfect authorization while people died, was considered unacceptable under military doctrine. But Thompson's resistance also highlighted another dimension of the crisis that Alexis was beginning to understand. Thompson's resistance also highlighted another dimension of the crisis that Alexis was beginning to understand. Decision to deploy their small F-35 formation for emergency combat operations would effectively be placing the mission's success or failure on her shoulders. As the flight lead, she would be responsible for tactical decisions, target identification, and coordination with ground forces under extreme time pressure. The military establishment that had spent 18 months questioning whether women could handle high-stress combat situations was about to discover whether their concerns were justified. If Alexis succeeded in saving the Marines and civilians, it would validate arguments for full gender integration in combat aviation. If she failed, the failure would be attributed to fundamental limitations that critics claimed affected all women. In combat roles, her encrypted communication device displayed an updated intelligence summary that made the stakes even more personal. Team Bravo leader is Captain James Morrison, your former flight instructor. Repeat, Morrison is on site with civilian evacuation team. Captain Morrison had been Alexis's primary instructor during advanced fighter training 2 years earlier. He was also one of the few senior officers who had consistently supported her assignment to combat aviation, arguing that competence and courage weren't gender-specific traits. The irony that she might now be responsible for saving the life of someone who had believed in her capabilities was not lost on her. But the intelligence update also revealed why the crisis had developed so rapidly. Morrison's team wasn't just conducting routine reconnaissance, they were executing an emergency evacuation of civilians from a conflict zone that had deteriorated faster than intelligence agencies had predicted. The civilians under attack weren't random refugees. They were likely American citizens or Allied personnel who had been rescued from other locations and were being processed through the covert base before being transported to safety. Viper 1. This is range control on secure frequency, Alpha 7. Switch to encrypted communications for detailed mission briefing. The instruction to switch to secure communications meant that the authorization for emergency deployment had finally come through. From senior command levels. Within minutes, Alexis would receive official orders to convert her training flight into a combat rescue mission, orders that would test every aspect of her training, experience, and psychological resilience. But she already knew that official authorization might come too late. According to her classified intelligence updates, the enemy forces attacking forward operating base, Reeves, were advancing rapidly and had already overrun the base's outer defensive positions. The Marines and civilians were now trapped in the central compound with limited ammunition and no prospect of reinforcement except from airborne assets. As Alexis prepared to switch her radio to the encrypted frequency, she realized that the next few minutes would determine not just the fate of 300 people trapped in a combat zone, but also the future of women in military aviation. The critics who had questioned her emotional stability, her decision-making ability, and her capacity for lethal action under pressure were about to receive a definitive answer to their concerns. The woman they had dismissed as a diversity hire was about to demonstrate that the future of aerial combat belonged to those who combined technical excellence with moral courage regardless of gender. But first, she had to survive the transition from routine training mission to life-or-death combat operation, a transformation that would test every skill she had developed during years of classified operations that officially never happened. Her finger moved toward the radio frequency selector, preparing to acknowledge orders that would change her life forever. The secure frequency crackled to life with a voice that Alexis immediately recognized as Colonel Rebecca Hayes, the wing commander whose authorization carried enough weight to convert training aircraft into emergency combat assets. Hayes had built her reputation during 3 tours in Afghanistan, where she had pioneered close air support tactics that saved countless ground troops. More importantly for this moment, she was one of the few senior officers who had consistently advocated for women in combat aviation based on performance rather than politics. Viper 1, this is Thunderbolt Actual. You are hereby tasked with Emergency Close Air Support Mission, designated Operation Lifeline. Authentication Code, Bravo 77 Alpha. Acknowledge. The authentication code confirmed that this was a legitimate combat tasking with full authorization from Pacific Command. Alexis felt the familiar surge of focused clarity that came with transitioning from training status to operational reality. But she also understood that accepting this mission would irrevocably change her career trajectory. Win or lose, she would no longer be able to hide behind the facade of routine training flights. Thunderbolt Actual. Viper 1 acknowledges Operation Lifeline. Request immediate mission briefing and authorization for weapon system activation. Her response was carefully worded to indicate both acceptance of the mission and readiness to utilize the F-35's classified emergency capabilities. The weapon system activation she referenced would convert their training equipment into lethal ordnance delivery systems, a process that was theoretically possible but had never been attempted under actual combat conditions. Viper 1, you are authorized for Emergency Protocol 7. Repeat, Emergency Protocol 7 is now active. Mission timeline is critical. You have primary command authority for all tactical decisions. Alexis felt her heart rate spike slightly as she processed the implications of Emergency Protocol 7. The classification level was so high that even discussing it over secure radio channels was highly unusual. More significantly, the protocol granted her unprecedented autonomy to make tactical decisions without waiting for higher authorization. Autonomy that reflected both the desperate nature of the situation and the command structure's confidence. In her capabilities, Lieutenant Commander, Vance's voice cut through the frequency with obvious confusion and growing concern. Viper 1, I'm not reading you on this secure channel. Are we switching mission parameters? My weapon systems are showing training configuration. The question highlighted a critical security consideration that Alexis had anticipated. Vance and Thompson didn't have the classified clearance levels necessary to receive detailed briefings about Emergency Protocol 7. They would have to be brought into the mission on a need-to-know basis, with limited information about their actual objectives and capabilities. Viper 2, maintain formation and standby for updated mission parameters. You'll receive specific tasking once we're en route to the operational area. Alexis responded, her tone carrying the authority of a flight leader taking command of a developing situation. But even as she spoke, Alexis was activating systems within her F-35 that her wingman didn't know existed. Her fingers moved across hidden control panels, entering authorization codes that converted simulated weapons displays into actual targeting systems. The process felt surreal, like watching a movie set transform into a real battlefield through the flip of invisible switches. Colonel Hayes continued the briefing with military precision. Viper 1, target location is forward operating base. Reef at grid 347,298. 300 friendly personnel under attack by estimated battalion strength enemy forces. Your mission is to provide immediate close air support and enable evacuation of critical personnel and civilians. The official confirmation of what Alexis already knew through classified channels carried additional weight because it established legal authority for what would essentially be combat operations in disputed international waters. Without proper authorization, any military action could be considered an act of war with unpredictable diplomatic consequences. Thunderbolt Actual, Viper 1 copies mission parameters. Request clarification on rules of engagement and coordination procedures with ground forces. Her question was tactically sound, but also reflected the complexity of conducting combat operations with minimal preparation time. Rules of engagement determined what targets she could attack and under what circumstances, while coordination procedures would establish how she would communicate with the Marines under attack and avoid fratricide incidents. Viper 1, rules of engagement are weapons free on any hostile forces threatening friendly positions. Ground control frequency will be Papa 4-4, call sign Reef Base Actual. Time to target is critical, estimate 15 minutes before defensive. Positions are overrun, 15 minutes. The timeline was even more compressed than Alexis had calculated, which meant that any delay in departure would result in arriving too late to affect the outcome. She quickly calculated flight time, fuel consumption, and weapons engagement parameters while maintaining formation with her confused wingman. Major Thompson's voice carried a note of panic as he finally grasped that their routine training mission had become something far more serious. Viper 1, are we talking about actual combat operations here? Because I need to understand what we're being asked to do. My aircraft isn't configured for real weapons delivery, and I haven't received any briefing about emergency procedures. His reaction was understandable, but potentially catastrophic for mission success. Thompson's resistance to operational flexibility had been a concern during training exercises, but now it threatened to compromise a life-or-death rescue mission. Alexis realized that she might have to complete the mission with only partial support from her wingman. Viper 3, maintain formation and follow my lead. You'll receive specific instructions as we proceed to the target area. This is a legitimate military operation with full authorization from Pacific Command. But even as she tried to reassure Thompson, Alexis was making calculations about how to conduct effective close air support with potentially unreliable wingmen. The tactical situation would require precise coordination between multiple aircraft attacking different target sets. while avoiding friendly positions, exactly the kind of complex operation that had been used to justify excluding women from combat aviation. Her encrypted communication device displayed a final message from forward operating base reef. Enemy forces breaching inner perimeter. Civilian evacuation. Point under direct fire. Request immediate air support OR. Will be overrun in minutes. The message crystallized everything that had been building since the morning's first hint of crisis. Somewhere 180 miles away, Captain Morrison and 300 other people were fighting for their lives against overwhelming odds. The only thing standing between them and catastrophe was a 3-ship formation of F-35s, led by a pilot that half the military establishment still considered an experimental risk rather than a proven asset. Alexis looked at her fuel gauges one final time, confirmed that her weapon systems had successfully converted to combat configuration, and made the decision that would define the rest of her career. She pushed her throttles forward and banked toward the southeast, committing herself and her wingmen to a combat mission that would either validate everything she had worked for or confirm every doubt that had been raised about women in fighter aircraft. Thunderbolt Actual, Viper flight departing training area en route to operational target. Estimate time on target 12 minutes. Colonel Hayes' response carried a note of confidence that Alexis hoped she deserved. Viper 1, good hunting. Bring our people home. As the 3 F-35s accelerated toward their destiny, Alexis allowed herself one moment of reflection about the journey that had brought her to this point. Every slight, every questioned decision, every suggestion that she didn't belong in a cockpit had been leading to this moment when she would finally have the opportunity to prove that courage and competence transcended gender entirely. The flight to forward operating base reef took the 3 F-35s over increasingly hostile waters, where commercial shipping traffic gave way to the ominous emptiness that characterized disputed territorial zones. At maximum cruise speed, the advanced fighters covered the 180 nautical miles in just under 8 minutes. But for Alexis, every second felt like an eternity as she monitored emergency communications from the embattled base. The tactical situation was deteriorating faster than even the most pessimistic intelligence estimates had predicted. Through her encrypted communication system, Alexis could hear fragmentary radio transmissions from the Marines defending forward operating base reef, broken sentences punctuated by the distinctive crack of small arms fire and the deeper rumble of incoming artillery rounds. Reef base actual, this is Viper 1 inbound your location. Estimate 4 minutes to target area. Request immediate situation report and target priorities. Captain Morrison's voice came through the radio with the controlled urgency of a professional soldier managing multiple crises simultaneously. Viper 1, Reef Base Actual. Enemy forces have penetrated our outer defensive ring from the north and east. We have approximately 60 hostiles advancing on the main compound, with what appears to be armor support. Our biggest problem is a machine gun nest on the ridge overlooking the civilian evacuation point. GRID 347,301. That position has us pinned down and is preventing extraction of non-combatants. The tactical picture that emerged from Morrison's briefing was more complex than a simple rescue mission. The attacking forces weren't just overwhelming the Marine defenders through superior numbers. They were using sophisticated tactics that suggested professional military training rather than irregular forces. The mention of armor support was particularly concerning because it indicated enemy capabilities that exceeded what intelligence agencies had reported for the region. Lieutenant Commander Vance finally managed to establish contact on the secure frequency, her voice tight with stress as she tried to understand her role in an operation that exceeded anything covered in their training scenarios. Viper 1, Viper 2 is configured and ready, but I need to understand our tactical approach. Are we cleared for danger close air support with friendlies in the immediate target area? The question highlighted one of the most challenging aspects of close air support operations, delivering lethal ordnance in close proximity to friendly forces without causing fratricide. Danger close missions required extraordinary precision and coordination, especially when the pilots had never worked with the ground forces before and were operating under extreme time pressure. Viper 2, affirmative on danger close authorization. Follow my lead on target selection and attack profiles. We'll use precision-guided munitions with minimal blast radius to reduce risk to friendly positions. But even as Alexis provided tactical guidance to her wingmen, she was dealing with a more serious problem in the form of Major Thompson's continued resistance to their rapidly evolving mission. His radio transmissions carried an edge of panic that suggested he was having difficulty processing the transition from training exercise to actual combat. Viper 1, this is Viper 3. I'm showing multiple system warnings that I've never seen before. My weapons displays are indicating live ordnance, but that's impossible because we launched with training configurations. I think we have a serious malfunction that requires immediate return to base. Thompson's confusion was understandable, but potentially catastrophic for mission success. The Emergency Protocol 7 activation had converted their training systems to combat capability in ways that weren't covered in standard pilot training. His aircraft was functioning perfectly, but his lack of classified clearance meant he had no frame of reference for understanding what had happened to his weapons systems. Alexis found herself in the impossible position of trying to explain classified emergency procedures to a pilot who wasn't authorized to receive that information, while simultaneously coordinating a rescue mission under extreme time pressure. The solution required a delicate balance of operational security and mission necessity. Viper 3, your systems are functioning normally. Emergency protocols have been activated by higher authority. Follow my instructions precisely and disregard warning messages that don't indicate actual malfunctions. This is a legitimate combat operation with full authorization. The first visual contact with forward operating base Reeves confirmed the desperate nature of the situation. What had been designed as a covert intelligence gathering station was now a battlefield, with smoke rising from multiple buildings and visible muzzle flashes indicating active combat throughout the compound. The base's strategic location on a small island provided natural defensive advantages, but also made evacuation extremely difficult since the only escape routes were by air or sea. More concerning was the sight of enemy vessels visible in the waters surrounding the island, fast attack craft that appeared to be positioning themselves to intercept any attempt at maritime evacuation. The attacking forces had clearly planned this operation carefully, cutting off escape routes while maintaining overwhelming pressure on the defensive positions. Reef Base Actual, Viper 1 has visual contact with your position. I can see enemy vessels surrounding the island and what appears to be coordinated attack from multiple directions. Request immediate marking of friendly positions to avoid fratricide. Morrison's response came through bursts of static that suggested his communication equipment was being affected by nearby explosions. Viper 1, friendlies are marked with orange smoke in the central compound. Enemy positions are concentrated on the northern ridge and advancing through the eastern approach. Priority target is the machine gun nest at grid 347,301. That position is preventing us from reaching the civilians. As Alexis began her attack run toward the priority target, she could see the tactical problem that had the Marines pinned down. The machine gun position was expertly placed to command both the main compound and the helicopter landing zone, where civilians were supposed to be evacuated. Any attempt to move personnel between buildings or toward extraction points would expose them to devastating enfilade fire, but the target position was also dangerously close to a building that appeared to house some of the civilians Morrison was trying to protect. The margin for error in attacking the machine gun nest was measured in meters rather than the hundreds of yards that characterized most close air support missions. Viper 1 is rolling in hot on priority target. All other aircraft maintain holding pattern until this engagement is complete. Alexis lined up her approach carefully, using the F-35's advanced targeting systems to identify the exact location of the enemy position while calculating blast effects that would neutralize the threat without endangering nearby civilians. The precision required was extraordinary. Too little explosive force would fail to eliminate the machine gun, while too much could cause civilian casualties that would make the rescue mission a Pyrrhic victory. As she pressed the attack, Alexis realized that this moment represented everything her critics had worried about when questioning women's suitability for combat aviation. She was making split-second decisions that could save or doom 300 people, operating under extreme stress while managing wingmen who weren't fully prepared for the mission's complexity. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same military establishment that had questioned her emotional stability under pressure was now depending entirely on her judgment to prevent a massacre. In the next few seconds, she would either validate their confidence or confirm their worst fears about women in combat roles. The moment Alexis pressed the trigger and released her first precision-guided munition, the nature of the conflict transformed from a desperate defensive action into a full-scale battle that would test every aspect of her training and resolve. The 500-pound bomb struck the machine gun nest with surgical precision, eliminating the immediate threat to civilian evacuation while sending a shockwave through the enemy forces that reverberated far beyond the physical destruction. But instead of retreating in the face of air support, the attacking forces responded with a level of coordination and firepower that confirmed Alexis's worst fears about the true nature of this operation. Anti-aircraft missiles streaked skyward from previously hidden positions, forcing her into violent evasive maneuvers that pushed the F-35's performance envelope, while testing her G-force tolerance to its limits. Viper 1, SAM launch, SAM launch. Lieutenant Commander Vance's voice cracked with tension as she called out the surface-to-air missile threat that had appeared without warning. Multiple launches from the eastern shoreline. The presence of sophisticated anti-aircraft weapons transformed the tactical equation entirely. This wasn't a simple rescue mission against lightly armed irregular forces. It was a coordinated assault by military units equipped with modern weapons, systems, and the training to use them effectively. The enemy had been prepared for air intervention and had positioned assets specifically to counter American fighter aircraft. Alexis rolled her F-35 into a defensive spiral while deploying chaff and flares to confuse the incoming missiles. But she could see that the threat was more comprehensive than a few shoulder-fired weapons. The eastern shoreline had revealed itself as a carefully prepared anti-aircraft ambush, with multiple missile systems that had remained hidden until American aircraft were committed to the attack. All Viper aircraft, SAM threat is active from multiple positions. Recommend immediate tactical dispersal and counterattack on AA sites before continuing close air support. Her decision to prioritize the anti-aircraft threat over continued support for the Marines represented exactly the kind of complex tactical judgment that critics had claimed women couldn't make under pressure. She was choosing to temporarily abandon the people she had come to rescue in order to neutralize threats that could doom the entire mission if left unchecked. Major Thompson's voice carried barely controlled panic as his aircraft shuddered under the stress of high-G evasive maneuvers. Viper 1, I'm taking heavy missile fire and my threat warning systems are going crazy. This is way beyond anything we trained for. I recommend we break contact and call for backup from properly equipped units. His suggestion to abandon the mission reflected both the overwhelming nature of the opposition and his fundamental inability to adapt to rapidly changing tactical situations. But Alexis knew that no backup was available. They were the only air assets within response range, and the Marines below were running out of time regardless of the difficulties they faced. Viper 3, maintain formation and follow my attack. Profile: we're committed to this mission, and there are no alternative assets available. Focus on eliminating the A sites so we can resume close air support. But even as she provided tactical direction to her wingman, Alexis was processing intelligence. That made the situation even more complex. The coordinated nature of the attack, the sophisticated weapon systems, and the timing of the assault all suggested that this wasn't a spontaneous military action, but rather a carefully planned operation designed to capture or destroy forward. Operating Base Reef and its classified contents. Her encrypted communication device displayed a priority message that confirmed her analysis. Intelligence indicates state-sponsored operation, enemy, forces equipped with advanced weapons and electronic warfare capabilities, extraction of base personnel now critical for national security. The revelation that they were facing a state-sponsored military operation rather than irregular forces completely changed the strategic implications of the battle. If a foreign government was conducting an assault on American intelligence assets, the conflict had already escalated beyond a simple rescue mission into something approaching an act of war. More immediately, the presence of electronic warfare capabilities explained why her communication with forward operating Base Reef was becoming increasingly intermittent. The enemy was actively jamming radio frequencies and attempting to disrupt coordination between the air support and ground forces tactics that required sophisticated equipment and specialized training. Reef Base Actual, Viper 1, I'm showing heavy electronic interference. Switch to backup frequency Papa 7-7 and prepare for communication blackout procedures. Morrison's response was barely audible through the static, but his words carried devastating news. Viper 1, enemy forces have breached the main compound. We're down to our final defensive positions. Civilian evacuation is impossible under current conditions. Unknown time remaining before we're overrun. The message crystallized the impossible tactical situation Alexis was facing. She needed to simultaneously neutralize multiple anti-aircraft sites to protect her own aircraft, provide close air support to prevent the Marines from being overrun, and create conditions that would allow civilian evacuation, all while operating under electronic jamming that was degrading her ability to coordinate with ground forces. Lieutenant Commander Vance managed to eliminate one of the eastern anti-aircraft positions with a well-placed strike, but her success only revealed the true scope of the defensive network they were facing. Additional missile launchers appeared from concealed positions, and the volume of defensive fire actually increased rather than diminished. Viper 1, this is Viper 2. I've got visual on at least 6 more A sites that weren't visible before. They've got overlapping fields of fire that are going to make close air support extremely dangerous. How do you want to proceed? Vance's question highlighted the central tactical dilemma. Continuing close air support missions would expose the F-35s to unacceptable levels of anti-aircraft fire, but abandoning close air support would guarantee that the Marines and civilians would be overrun by enemy ground forces. The solution required a level of tactical innovation that went beyond standard military doctrine. Alexis realized that she needed to use the F-35's most advanced capabilities systems that were so classified that her wingmen didn't even know they existed, to create a tactical advantage that could break the deadlock. Viper Flight, I'm activating enhanced targeting protocols. Follow my lead and engage targets as I designate them. We're going to overwhelm their defensive network through coordinated simultaneous attacks. What she didn't explain to her wingmen was that the enhanced targeting protocols involved linking all 3 F-35s through an artificial intelligence system that could calculate optimal attack patterns faster than human pilots could process the information. The system was so classified that its existence was known only to a handful of senior officers and the pilots, cleared to use it in extreme circumstances. As Alexis activated the AI targeting system, her cockpit displays transformed into something that looked more like a video game than traditional aircraft instrumentation. The system identified optimal attack routes, calculated probability of success for different target sets, and provided real-time tactical recommendations that took into account dozens of variables simultaneously. But using the classified system also meant accepting full responsibility for its consequences. If the AI-assisted attack succeeded in breaking the enemy's defensive network, it would represent a revolutionary advancement in air combat tactics. If they failed, the blame for the mission's failure would rest entirely on her decision to use untested technology in a desperate situation. More critically, activating the system while her wingmen were unaware of its capabilities created new risks of coordination failures and friendly fire incidents. She was essentially conducting an experimental combat operation while trying to save 300 lives, exactly the kind of high-risk decision-making that had been used to justify excluding women from combat aviation in the first place. Artificial intelligence targeting system that Alexis activated was the product of 5 years of classified development by the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and its first operational use was about to redefine the future of aerial warfare. As the system came online, her cockpit displays transformed into a 3-dimensional tactical map that showed not just current enemy positions, but predicted future movements based on pattern analysis of their coordinated assault. But the AI revealed something far more disturbing than sophisticated anti-aircraft defenses. The attack pattern on forward operating base Reef wasn't just professional. It was specifically designed to capture, rather than destroy, the intelligence facility. Enemy forces were systematically isolating and securing key buildings while deliberately avoiding damage to the base's communication and computer systems. Viper 1 enhanced targeting system is showing enemy movement patterns consistent with intelligence extraction rather than destruction. Alexis transmitted to her wingmen, though she couldn't explain that the information was coming from a system they didn't know existed. They're trying to capture the base intact, which means our close air support options are more limited than we thought. The revelation fundamentally changed the tactical equation. If the enemy's objective was to capture classified intelligence systems, rather than simply overrun the base, then using heavy ordnance near the main buildings could actually serve enemy interests by forcing the Marines to evacuate areas where sensitive equipment was located. Lieutenant Commander Vance responded with the tactical acumen that had earned her selection for the F-35 program. Viper 1, if they want the intelligence assets intact, that gives us leverage. We can threaten to destroy what they're trying to capture if they don't withdraw. But even as Vance suggested this strategy, Alexis's AI system was revealing an even more complex layer to the enemy operation. The attacking forces weren't just trying to capture American intelligence. They were systematically jamming and monitoring all communications from the battle zone. Every radio transmission, every tactical coordination, every piece of operational intelligence was being recorded and analyzed in real time. The implications were staggering. The enemy wasn't just conducting a raid on a classified installation. They were using the battle as an opportunity to gather comprehensive intelligence about American military capabilities, tactics, and response procedures. Every decision Alexis made, every weapon system she employed, every coordination protocol she used was providing valuable information to hostile intelligence services. More critically, her use of the classified AI targeting system was being monitored and recorded by enemy electronic warfare specialists. If they successfully analyzed how the system worked, it could compromise one of America's most advanced military technologies and provide hostile forces with countermeasures for future conflicts. Reef Base Actual, Viper 1, I need immediate Confirmation of your intelligence asset status. Are your classified systems secure or compromised? Morrison's response came through increasing static and background noise that suggested the communication jamming was intensifying. Viper 1. Intelligence systems are still secure, but we're running out of time. Enemy forces are using some kind of advanced scanning equipment on buildings they've captured. They're not just looting, they're conducting systematic intelligence collection. The confirmation that enemy forces were using sophisticated scanning equipment to extract intelligence from captured areas provided the final piece of a disturbing puzzle. This wasn't a conventional military assault, it was a hybrid operation that combined kinetic warfare with cyber espionage and intelligence gathering. The attacking forces were essentially conducting a real-time penetration test of American military security, while simultaneously trying to capture valuable intelligence assets. Major Thompson's voice crackled over the radio with barely controlled panic as his aircraft shuddered under the impact of near-miss anti-aircraft fire. Viper 1, I'm taking heavy damage and my systems are showing multiple malfunctions. I think they're using some kind of electronic warfare weapon that's interfering with my aircraft's computers. His observation was more accurate than he realized. The AI system was detecting directed energy weapons designed specifically to disrupt the electronic systems that modern fighter aircraft depended on. The enemy wasn't just trying to shoot down American planes, they were trying to capture them intact by disabling their avionics and forcing emergency landings. Viper 3. Execute emergency protocol, Delta 9 immediately. Switch all systems to hardened mode and maintain maximum distance from ground-based transmitters. Alexis's instruction referenced another classified procedure that would protect Thompson's aircraft from electronic warfare attacks, but it would also severely limit his combat effectiveness. She was essentially reducing her 3-ship formation to a 2-ship mission, while operating under the most challenging tactical conditions any of them had ever faced. But the AI system revealed one final, devastating piece of intelligence that changed everything about the mission. Analysis of enemy communication patterns indicated that this assault on forward operating base Reef was not an isolated incident. It was part of a coordinated series of attacks on American intelligence facilities throughout the Pacific region. While they were engaged in desperate combat to save 300 people on a single island, similar battles were being fought in other classified installations across thousands of miles of ocean. The enemy had planned and executed a comprehensive campaign to simultaneously compromise multiple American intelligence gathering operations, creating a strategic disaster that extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. The encrypted display showed fragmentary reports from other bases. Pine Ridge Station under attack. Coral Reef Facility communication lost. Blue Water Installation reporting enemy landings. The pattern was unmistakable. Someone had identified and targeted every major American intelligence asset in the Pacific Theater simultaneously. Viper 2, I'm uploading tactical data to your system. We're not just dealing with an isolated attack. This is part of a coordinated campaign against multiple installations. Our mission success has implications beyond just saving the people. At Reef Base, Vance's response reflected the growing realization that they were participants in a much larger conflict than anyone had anticipated. Viper 1, are you saying this is the beginning of a wider war? Because if enemy forces are hitting multiple targets simultaneously, this could be the opening move in a major military campaign. The question that Vance raised was exactly what Alexis was beginning to understand through the AI system strategic analysis. The simultaneous attacks on multiple intelligence facilities suggested a level of planning and coordination that could only come from a major military power preparing for broader conflict with the United States. But the immediate tactical situation remained critical regardless of the strategic implications. The Marines and civilians at Forward Operating Base Reef were still trapped and running out of time. While enemy forces continued their systematic efforts to capture both personnel and intelligence assets, the AI system calculated that enemy ground forces would reach the final defensive positions within approximately 8 minutes unless the air support mission achieved decisive results immediately. But achieving those results would require using the F-35's most advanced and classified capabilities in ways that would reveal American technological advantages to hostile intelligence services monitoring the battle. Alexis faced the ultimate test of command judgment. She could save the 300 people trapped on the island, but only by potentially compromising military secrets that could affect national security for years to come. The decision represented exactly the kind of impossible choice that military leaders faced in wartime, where every option carried profound consequences that extended far beyond immediate tactical concerns. As she prepared to implement the AI system's recommended attack pattern, Alexis realized that this moment would define not just her own career, but potentially the future of American military operations in the Pacific region. The woman who had been dismissed as a diversity hire was about to make strategic decisions that could influence the balance of power between nations. The AI-assisted coordinated strike that Alexis launched against the enemy's anti-aircraft network was executed with a precision that bordered on supernatural. 3 precisely timed explosions eliminated the primary surface-to-air missile sites within seconds of each other, creating a temporary window of air superiority that allowed the F-35s to provide devastating close air support to the embattled Marines below. Viper 1, outstanding strike coordination. Morrison's voice carried genuine relief as enemy pressure on the main compound suddenly diminished. Enemy ground forces are falling back from the central defensive positions. We've got breathing room to begin civilian evacuation procedures. For a brief, euphoric moment, it appeared that the mission had succeeded against impossible odds. Lieutenant Commander Vance efficiently eliminated 2 additional enemy positions that had been pinning down evacuation routes, while even Major Thompson managed to contribute effective fire support despite his damaged aircraft systems. The combination of advanced technology and superior pilot training seemed to have overcome the enemy's numerical and positional advantages, but Alexis's AI system was already detecting new patterns that suggested their apparent victory was premature. Enemy forces weren't retreating in disorder. They were conducting a coordinated, tactical withdrawal to predetermined secondary positions. More ominously, the electronic warfare jamming that had been disrupting communications suddenly ceased entirely, allowing crystal-clear radio contact between all participants in the battle. Reef Base Actual, this is Viper 1. I'm showing enemy forces withdrawing to defensive positions rather than full retreat. Maintain security protocols and prepare for possible counterattack. Her warning proved prophetic when Morrison's next transmission carried a note of confusion that quickly transformed into alarm. Viper 1, we're detecting multiple aircraft approaching from the northeast. Fast-moving contacts that don't match any friendly aircraft in our database. Estimate 6 to 8 hostiles inbound our location. The appearance of enemy fighter aircraft transformed the tactical situation entirely. What had seemed like a successful rescue mission was about to become an air-to-air combat engagement that would test Alexis's skills against pilots who had been specifically trained to counter American fighter tactics. The enemy's withdrawal hadn't been a retreat, it had been a tactical repositioning to clear the airspace for their own air support. Worse, via I-Systems analysis of the approaching aircraft revealed a disturbing truth about their opponents. The incoming fighters weren't the older, less capable aircraft that intelligence agencies had associated with regional military forces. They were advanced, stealth-capable aircraft that incorporated design elements stolen from American development programs. All Viper aircraft, we have multiple bandits inbound from the northeast. Unknown aircraft type, but showing stealth characteristics. Prepare for air-to-air engagement while maintaining overwatch of ground forces. The instruction to simultaneously conduct air-to-air combat while protecting ground forces represented exactly the kind of complex multitasking that critics had claimed would overwhelm female pilots under stress. Alexis found herself coordinating between 3 different tactical priorities: engaging enemy fighters, protecting the Marines below, and preventing the capture of classified intelligence assets while operating under electronic warfare conditions that degraded her situational awareness. Lieutenant Commander Vance's voice carried a new tension as her aircraft's threat warning systems detected the approaching enemy fighters. Viper 1, my radar is showing 6 contacts with advanced electronic countermeasures. These aren't the aircraft we were briefed to expect. Somebody's been hiding their actual capabilities. But even as Vance reported the enhanced threat, Alexis was processing intelligence through her AI system that revealed the true scope of what they were facing. The enemy aircraft weren't just advanced. They were specifically configured to exploit known vulnerabilities in F-35 combat systems. Someone had provided detailed technical intelligence about American fighter capabilities to hostile forces. Viper 2, implement electronic warfare defensive protocols immediately. These aircraft have been designed to counter our specific systems. The first air-to-air engagement began at maximum range, with beyond visual range missiles streaking between opposing formations at velocities that compress decision-making into millisecond intervals. Alexis's enhanced training and AI assistance allowed her to successfully evade incoming missiles while positioning for counterattack, but she could see that her wingmen were struggling to adapt to the pace and complexity of the engagement. Major Thompson's damaged aircraft proved particularly vulnerable to the sophisticated electronic warfare systems employed by the enemy fighters. His threat warning systems were providing false readings, his missile guidance was being jammed, and his communication with the other F-35s was becoming increasingly intermittent. Viper 3 is Winchester on missiles and showing multiple system failures, Thompson transmitted with barely controlled panic. I cannot effectively engage these targets and recommend immediate withdrawal to prevent aircraft loss. His suggestion to withdraw represented the kind of tactical decision that could doom the Marines and civilians below while potentially allowing enemy forces to capture the intelligence assets they had come to steal. But it also reflected the reality that Thompson's aircraft was becoming more liability than asset in the evolving engagement. Viper 3 maintain defensive positioning and provide overwatch for ground forces. Viper 2 and I will handle air-to-air engagement. But even as Alexis relegated Thompson to a support role, the AI system was revealing that the enemy's air attack was itself a deception designed to mask their real objective. While American attention was focused on the incoming fighters, enemy ground forces were using the distraction to advance on forward operating base reef from unexpected directions. Morrison's voice suddenly crackled over the radio with urgent alarm. Viper 1, we've got enemy infiltrators inside the main compound. They came up through what appears to be an underwater approach route. The civilian evacuation point is under direct attack by forces that were already inside our defensive perimeter. The revelation that enemy special forces had infiltrated the base during the air-to-air engagement represented a level of tactical sophistication that exceeded anything American intelligence had predicted. The entire battle had been orchestrated to create precisely the conditions that would allow covert infiltration while American air assets were distracted by more obvious threats. More critically, the infiltrators were targeting the civilian evacuation point specifically, suggesting that their objective wasn't just to capture intelligence assets, but to take hostages, who could be used for political leverage. The mission that had begun as a rescue operation was becoming a hostage crisis with international implications. Reef Base Actual, can you contain the infiltrators, or do you need immediate close air support on the compound itself? Morrison's response. revealed the impossible tactical situation the Marines faced. Viper 1. The infiltrators are positioned where close air support would endanger the civilians we're trying to protect. We need precision engagement that's beyond the capability of air-delivered ordnance. The admission that air power couldn't solve the crisis on the ground forced Alexis to confront the limitations of even the most advanced military technology. No amount of precision-guided munitions could eliminate threats that were intermingled with innocent civilians in confined spaces. The solution would require a level of tactical innovation that went beyond conventional air-to-ground support. As she processed this information while simultaneously engaging enemy fighters and coordinating with her wingmen, Alexis realized that their apparent tactical victory had been transformed into an even more complex crisis that threatened to end in failure despite their initial success. The enemy had anticipated American air support and had prepared countermeasures that turned every advantage into a potential liability. The woman who had been told she lacked the decisiveness for combat command was about to face the ultimate test of leadership under conditions that would challenge the most experienced military commanders in history. The moment that would define Captain Alexis Reeves's entire career and potentially change the course of military aviation history came when she made a decision that violated every protocol, exceeded every authorization, and transcended every limitation that had been placed on combat pilots throughout the history of warfare. Viper 2, take over air-to-air engagement coordination. I'm going to attempt something that has never been done before. Lieutenant Commander Vance's response carried both confusion and growing concern as she watched Alexis break formation and begin descending toward forward operating base reef at an angle that seemed to defy tactical logic. Viper 1, your approach vector is taking you directly into the engagement zone. Please clarify your intentions. But Alexis couldn't explain her intentions, because what she was about to attempt existed in a classified realm that even her wingmen weren't authorized to know about. Hidden within the F-35's most advanced systems was an experimental capability that had been tested only in simulation: the ability to convert the aircraft itself into a precision weapon system for surgical strikes in urban environments. The capability was so secret that it didn't appear in any official technical manuals, and its use required authorization codes that only a handful of senior commanders possessed. But 18 months of apparent routine training flights had actually included covert testing of this system, and Alexis was one of only 3 pilots in the world qualified to attempt what military theorists called kinetic precision engagement, essentially using the F-35 as a guided missile while maintaining pilot survival. As she descended toward the compound where civilians were being held hostage by enemy infiltrators, Alexis activated systems that transformed her aircraft into something unprecedented in the history of aerial warfare. The F-35's advanced computer systems began calculating approach vectors, impact angles, and escape trajectories that would allow her to physically strike enemy positions with the aircraft's reinforced nose cone, while maintaining enough control to recover and egress safely. Reef Base Actual. This is Viper 1. I need precise coordinates for infiltrator positions and confirmation that all friendly personnel and civilians are in hardened positions. I'm going to conduct a kinetic engagement that will require everyone to be under hard cover. Morrison's response revealed both his professional trust in her judgment and his recognition that conventional tactics had failed to resolve the crisis. Viper 1, infiltrator positions are marked with infrared strobes visible only to your thermal systems. All friendlies and civilians are in the underground shelter complex. You are cleared for any action necessary to eliminate the threat. The authorization Morrison provided was unprecedented in scope, essentially giving her permission to take any action necessary regardless of risk or protocol. But Alexis understood that this level of trust came with absolute responsibility for the consequences. If her experimental tactic failed, she would bear full accountability for the deaths of everyone she was trying to save. The AI targeting system integrated with her kinetic engagement protocols to create a three-dimensional attack solution that took into account the aircraft's momentum, the structural limitations of both the F-35 and the target buildings, and the precise timing required to eliminate the infiltrators while avoiding civilian casualties. The margins for error were measured in inches and milliseconds tolerances that would challenge the most advanced computer systems ever developed. As Alexis began her final approach toward the first infiltrator position, her aircraft's threat warning systems detected something that made her blood run cold. The enemy special forces weren't just holding civilians hostage. They were wearing suicide vests designed to detonate if they detected incoming airstrikes or ground assault. The enemy had planned to create a no-win scenario where any rescue attempt would result in massive civilian casualties. But the kinetic engagement approach that Alexis was attempting offered a solution that the enemy hadn't anticipated. By using the aircraft's physical structure as the weapon rather than explosives, she could neutralize the infiltrators too quickly for them to trigger their suicide devices. The technique required her to literally fly her F-35 through reinforced concrete walls at precisely calculated angles and velocities. Viper 1, your approach vector shows collision course with the main compound. Confirm your intentions and abort. If necessary. Vance transmitted with obvious alarm as she watched Alexis's aircraft diving toward what appeared to be certain destruction. But Alexis was already committed to an approach that would either save 300 lives or end her own in spectacular failure. Her aircraft struck the first target building at exactly the calculated impact point, her reinforced nose cone punching through concrete and steel to eliminate the infiltrator position, while her flight controls automatically executed a recovery sequence that pulled her clear of the structure before catastrophic damage could occur. The precision required for the maneuver was beyond human capability alone. It required the seamless integration of pilot skill, artificial intelligence, and aircraft systems working in perfect harmony. But Alexis's experience with classified systems and her intuitive understanding of the F-35's capabilities allowed her to execute what amounted to controlled crashes that eliminated enemy positions without triggering their suicide devices. Target 1 eliminated, proceeding to Target 2. She transmitted with calm professionalism that masked the extraordinary nature of what she was accomplishing. Her aircraft had sustained significant structural damage from the impact, but redundant systems and advanced materials allowed her to continue operations, despite stress levels that would have destroyed conventional fighter aircraft. The second kinetic engagement required even greater precision because the infiltrator position was closer to civilian shelter areas. Alexis calculated an approach that would strike the enemy position while directing the aircraft's momentum away from areas where civilians might be endangered by debris or structural collapse. As she lined up for the second impact, enemy fighters attempting to intercept her were forced to break off their attack because her flight path took her so close to their own ground forces that engaging her would risk fratricide. Her tactical innovation had not only solved the hostage crisis, but it also neutralized the air-to-air threat by forcing enemy aircraft into an impossible tactical position. The second impact eliminated the remaining infiltrators while demonstrating a level of flying skill that redefined what was possible in modern aerial warfare. But the structural damage from two kinetic engagements had pushed her F-35 beyond safe operational limits. Warning lights illuminated throughout her cockpit as critical systems began failing from the stress of impacts that no aircraft had been designed to survive. Viper 1, your aircraft is showing severe structural damage. Recommend immediate egress and emergency landing procedures. Vance transmitted as she watched Alexis's F-35 struggling to maintain controlled flight with visible damage to its airframe. But Alexis wasn't finished. Her AI system had identified a third threat that conventional weapons couldn't address: Enemy watercraft approaching the island with what appeared to be additional hostage-taking teams. The approaching vessels were too close to civilian positions for conventional air-to-ground attacks, but they were positioned perfectly for one final kinetic engagement that would eliminate the maritime threat while demonstrating capabilities that would deter future enemy operations. Viper 2 assumed tactical command of remaining air-to-air engagement. I'm going to eliminate the maritime threat and then attempt emergency recovery. As Alexis rolled her damaged F-35 into a final attack dive toward the enemy vessels, she realized that this moment represented everything her critics had claimed women couldn't handle in combat aviation. She was making split-second life-or-death decisions while managing catastrophic aircraft damage, coordinating with other aircraft, and executing maneuvers that had never been attempted in actual combat. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same military establishment that had questioned her emotional stability under pressure was about to witness her willingly risking death to save others, the ultimate demonstration that courage and competence transcended every stereotype that had been used to limit women's participation in combat roles. Her final kinetic engagement eliminated the maritime threat, while proving that the F-35 platform could be used in ways that its designers had never imagined. But as she attempted to recover from the attack, multiple critical systems finally failed, simultaneously forcing her to make one last decision that would either secure her place in military history or end her life in service to others. 6 months after the Battle of Forward Operating Base, Reef as military historians had begun calling it, Captain Alexis Viper Reeves stood before a joint session of Congress, wearing the Distinguished Flying Cross alongside the newly created Medal of Tactical Innovation that had been established specifically to recognize her unprecedented contribution to military aviation. The woman who had been told that women couldn't handle the stress of fighter combat had just finished briefing the nation's highest-ranking officials on revolutionary combat techniques that would reshape American air-power doctrine for decades to come. The emergency landing she had executed on the damaged runway at Forward Operating Base Reef with an F-35 that should have been structurally incapable of controlled flight had become required study material at every military academy in the country. But more importantly, the successful rescue of all 300 Marines and civilians had validated arguments for full gender integration in combat roles with an authority that no amount of theoretical debate could have achieved. The kinetic precision engagement techniques demonstrated by Captain Reeves, testified General Patricia Hayes, who had been promoted to Joint Chiefs of Staff partly based on her recognition of Alexis's capabilities, represent the most significant tactical innovation in close air support since the development of precision-guided munitions. Her actions have fundamentally changed how we think about urban warfare and hostage rescue operations. The congressional hearing was being broadcast live to military installations worldwide, where the testimony was reshaping conversations about women in combat that had persisted for generations. At Thunderbolt Air Base, Master Sergeant Rodriguez watched the proceedings with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had always judged people by their performance rather than their demographics, while Major Thompson, who had requested transfer to transport aircraft after experiencing what he described as combat stress reactions, was notable for his absence. But the most significant changes weren't occurring in congressional hearing rooms or Pentagon briefing sessions. They were happening in fighter squadrons around the world, where female pilots were finding that the skepticism and condescension that had characterized their daily experiences was being replaced by professional respect based on demonstrated capability rather than gender-based assumptions. Lieutenant Commander Vance, who had been promoted to squadron leader based partly on her performance during the Reef battle, was implementing new training protocols that emphasized tactical innovation over traditional doctrine. What Captain Reeves proved, she explained to her pilots during a briefing at the Navy's Top Gun School, is that the most dangerous opponents we face aren't necessarily other aircraft. They're the limitations we place on our own thinking about what's possible. In aerial warfare, the technological implications of Alexis's kinetic engagement techniques had sparked a classified research program involving every major aerospace contractor in the country. Engineers were developing new aircraft designs specifically intended to survive and exploit controlled impact scenarios, while AI specialists worked on targeting systems that could calculate kinetic engagement solutions in real-time combat situations. More broadly, the successful rescue at Forward Operating Base Reef had exposed and disrupted the coordinated intelligence gathering operation that had been targeting American facilities throughout the Pacific region. The enemy forces that had seemed so sophisticated and well-prepared had actually been conducting an elaborate intelligence collection mission designed to map American defensive capabilities and response procedures. Alexis's tactical innovations had not only saved lives, but had also provided false intelligence to hostile forces about American military capabilities. The enemy analysts who had monitored the battle were now struggling to understand how their carefully planned operation had been defeated by techniques that existed outside conventional military doctrine. The strategic impact extends far beyond the immediate tactical success, explained Dr. Sarah Chun, a defense analyst at the Rand Corporation, during her testimony before the congressional panel. By demonstrating capabilities that adversaries didn't know existed, Captain Reeves has created uncertainty in their planning processes that will benefit American national security for years to come. But for Alexis herself, the most meaningful recognition came not from medals or congressional testimony, but from the letters she received from the civilians whose lives she had saved during the Reef battle. Among them was a message from Dr. Elena Morrison, an epidemiologist who had been evacuating critical medical research data when the attack occurred, and whose work on infectious disease prevention had since saved thousands of lives in refugee camps across Southeast Asia. "You probably don't realize," Dr. Morrison had written, "that by saving my life, you also saved the research data that has allowed us to prevent cholera outbreaks in 3 different crisis zones." The ripple effects of heroism extend far beyond the immediate moment of action. The letter reminded Alexis that military service was ultimately about protecting people and preserving the conditions that allowed human civilization to flourish. The advanced aircraft, sophisticated weapons, and revolutionary tactics were all means to that end, not ends in themselves. Standing in her new role as Director of Advanced Tactical Development at the Pentagon, Alexis reflected on the journey that had brought her from being dismissed as a diversity hire to leading the military's most innovative combat development programs. The office walls displayed photographs from the Reef battle alongside technical diagrams of the kinetic engagement systems that were being developed based on her pioneering techniques. But the most prominent display in her office wasn't a military decoration or technical schematic. It was a simple photograph of the 300 people whose lives had been saved during that desperate battle 6 months earlier. Marines, intelligence specialists, civilian contractors, and rescued refugees stood together on the deck of the evacuation ship that had transported them to safety, their faces reflecting the relief of people who had been given a second chance at life. The photograph served as a daily reminder that behind every tactical innovation, every strategic decision, and every technological advancement were real people whose lives hung in the balance. Military aviation wasn't an abstract competition between nations or ideologies. It was about protecting individuals who deserved the chance to live, work, and contribute to making the world a better place. Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Santos, one of the new generation of female fighter pilots who had been inspired by Alexis's example, knocked on the office door with the respectful but confident bearing of someone who no longer felt the need to prove that women belonged in cockpits. "Ma'am, we've got the test results from the kinetic engagement simulation runs." The new pilots are adapting to the techniques faster than we anticipated. Alexis smiled as she reviewed the test data that showed female pilots consistently outperforming their male counterparts in scenarios requiring the kind of precise flying and split-second decision-making that characterized kinetic engagement operations. The results suggested that some of the physical and cognitive characteristics that had once been cited as limitations for women in combat aviation were actually advantages when it came to the most demanding forms of aerial warfare. Schedule A. Briefing with the Joint Chiefs for next week, Alexis instructed. It's time to officially incorporate kinetic engagement techniques into advanced fighter training curricula. And Lieutenant Colonel Santos, make sure the briefing emphasizes that these capabilities represent the future of air combat, not just innovative responses to crisis situations. As Santos departed to coordinate the briefing, Alexis turned back to the window overlooking the Pentagon's central courtyard, where young military personnel from every service branch moved with the confident purpose of people who were part of something larger than themselves. Among them were dozens of female officers whose career opportunities had been expanded by the precedent established during that desperate battle above. Forward Operating Base Reef, the woman who had been told that she lacked the emotional stability for combat command was now responsible for developing the tactics that would protect American forces in conflicts that hadn't yet been imagined. More importantly, she had helped establish the principle that military service was about competence, courage, and commitment to protecting others, characteristics that transcended every demographic category that had ever been used to limit human potential. The skeptics who had questioned whether women could handle high-stress combat situations had received their definitive answer in the form of revolutionary tactics that saved lives while advancing the boundaries of what was possible. In military aviation, the future belonged not to those who fit traditional stereotypes, but to those who combined technical excellence with the moral courage to risk everything in service to others. Captain Alexis Viper Reeves had earned her place in that future through actions that proved heroism was measured not by gender, but by the willingness to stand between innocent people and those who would harm them, regardless of the personal cost. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.